not globalism will be our credo. It's going to be only America first. America first. The American people will come first once again. With respect, the respect that we deserve. From this day forward, it's going to be only America first. America first.
Good evening, everybody. We're watching America First. My name is NickJFuentes. We have a great show for you tonight. Very excited, a special Friday show. Normally we're doing casual Friday, but tonight we have to have a little bit more of a formal look because we have a very, very special guest with us. This is probably, perhaps, I don't even think perhaps, definitely our most requested guest, Dr. E. Michael Jones, a man who needs no introduction, but we'll give him one anyway. He is a former professor from St. Mary's University, the author of many books, a lecturer, and the publisher of Culture Wars magazine. Dr. E. Michael Jones, welcome to America First.
Thank you, Nick. Good to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for taking the time today. Like I said, you're a bit of a legend on our show. We've been doing it for about 2 years, and I don't know for how long. I think at least about a year and a half, you have been the subject of countless super chats, comments. Get E. Michael Jones on the show. And so it is great to finally be with you. I see that you have been sort of making the rounds on a lot of these internet shows. I saw you on Canada First with Faith Goldie earlier in the week, and you've been on some other shows and really doing a lot of heavy media stuff. And I just want to ask right at the outset, before we get into anything substantive, it seems to me that you're rapidly growing in popularity. I think a lot of people are getting interested in your books, in your ideas, and it seems to be a lot of young people, actually. And so I wanted to ask you, what do you think you would attribute that level of interest to in your ideas, that so many young people seem to be interested in this idea of Logos or Catholicism or America First?
Well, the main reason is that Logos is the opposite of chaos. And chaos is the way this generation has been raised in one way or another. They've been abused by the culture that is supposed to take care of them. They have been lured into debt, crushing debt. They grew up with pornography on their cell phones. They've been subjected to the most ruthless form of social engineering and political control ever. I would say ever, because the social engineering that got imposed on me when I was 20 years old has been refined over this period of time. Nothing has been able to stop it. It's become more and more sophisticated, and it's become more and more technologically intrusive at the same time. So when I was growing up, if you wanted to call someone on the phone, you had to go to something hanging on the wall and had a wire attached to it, and you couldn't look at pictures. Well, now you've got people who are carrying around these little devices and they're staring at them all day. And these devices, they don't quite understand. They haven't understood that they're forms of control, but now we've got a generation that's waking up to the fact that, yeah, it's forms of control. And I've been given a bad deal. I've been dealt a bad hand. I'm in debt. I can't get married. I'm living in my mother's basement. I've had enough of this. I am just coming up with an explanation of something that they already know. And I think people who read something like Libido Dominandi, Sexual Liberation and Political Control, recognize that it's true. And it's an explanation of the life that they've are waking up and starting to understand.
That's such a great answer, and I think it's so true, particularly with the latest generation, my generation, Generation Z, because you're exactly right, as you describe. I think you can look at every area of modern life, and it's, as you say, it's chaos, it's problems, it's forms of social control. And so I think you're exactly right. And again, just getting into some more introductory stuff, because, I do want to get into some current events type issues. I know you've been making the rounds, so we don't want to do one of the interviews where you just kind of go over the basics, but just to sort of establish your answer to these ideas, you put forward this idea of the Logos being Christ. And I understand you're writing a book that is upcoming about this subject. Could you just give a little bit of a Reader's Digest, a little bit of a summary of what is this idea of Logos and why is it the answer to the future of the West?
Yeah, I came across this idea when I did the Jewish revolutionary spirit. I realized at that time, this was 2003, the Israel lobby had dragged America into another war in the Middle East. And I kept saying, well, it's the Jews who are doing this, and nobody was allowed to say it. So I decided, well, first of all, I have to define what a Jew is. And I couldn't do it without Logos, without the word Logos. I studied Greek when I was an undergraduate. I remember that book, the Greek dictionary, 5 columns, page after page of definitions of English words that all went back to that one word, Logos. So Logos means reason, first of all. It means speech, first of all. It means word, first of all. It goes to the heart of what we are, because we are rational creatures. And this was discovered during one of the greatest periods of intellectual development in human history, which is when the Greeks in Ionia started examining the world they lived in. And Thales said it was water, and Heraclitus said it was fire, and finally Anaxagoras said, no, there's a mind here. And the mind, the operating system for the mind behind this whole universe is Logos. That's the order of the universe. And so I came to the conclusion in the Jewish revolutionary spirit that the definition of the Jew was basically the people that were waiting for the Messiah, and when the Messiah came, they killed him. And when they killed him, they made an attack on Logos, because he is the Logos incarnate. And when you do that, when you reject Logos, you become a revolutionary, and that's what they've been ever since. So the turning point in history came when St. John basically wrote the gospel in Greek and began it with the word Logos. He said, in the beginning there was Logos, and Logos was with God, and Logos is God. So all of that striving on the part of these Greeks, these people who are honestly trying to understand the universe, all of that striving was accepted by Christianity. It wasn't rejected by it, and it was incorporated into Christianity, and it was raised to a higher level by revelation of God revealing himself in a way that we could never figure out. And so it solved the problem of the Greek philosophers, because Plato said that God cared for you, but it wasn't really powerful. And Aristotle's God was powerful and perfect, but there's no reason why he should care for you. And suddenly you realize, well, wait a minute, they're two parts of the same thing. And that same thing is what we call the Trinity. And that resolved that conflict, and it put all of humanity on a different level. It was a turning point of history. And so in this book, I'm trying to explain that, the connection between things we've all grown up with. We all know there are churches out there. We all know that Jesus Christ is part of that church, but we don't understand how it fits into the big picture, because Christianity has been disrupted by various movements, Protestantism being one of them. It became an emotional thing. But if you get back to its original meaning, and right now I'm talking about the Gospel of St. John and talking about in the beginning there was Logos. It's a continuation of reason. It is reason raised to a higher level, and that's what I'm trying to explain in this book.
That's so eloquently well said and wonderful. I think there is a lot of interest in that concept because it is so essential, and I think that was a big part of my religious understanding, is understanding that there seems to be an order to the universe. There's an appetite for order. It seems apparent that there is design intrinsic in things, and so I think that's probably why that's the answer to all these things, is the Logos. And so I think that's really well said. And I think one of the biggest myths as well that we've sort of constructed or revolutionaries, as you say, sort of deviating from the plan. One of the biggest myths is people saying the Dark Ages was brought on by Christianity, that once the medieval times came and Christianity was spread, that you had this gap from the ancients, the Romans and the Greeks, and then until the Enlightenment. And I think that's so important what you're talking about, that actually it was Christianity which elevated those ancient philosophers and all the ancient knowledge. So very important stuff. Now, on a bit of a similar note, I think there's been sort of a debate raging on the right wing for the past couple of years. It's something I've talked about with a lot of people on this show. And the question is fundamentally about religion on the right wing. Ostensibly, I am in a political realm, and I think a lot of people are thinking politically with the rise of Donald Trump. That was kind of the animus for a lot of interest in reactionary right-wing or Catholic ideas. And I think the big question that has been raised is it possible to solve some of these problems, or, the big problems of modernity, of leftism, of liberalism, with a secular right wing, or is religion essential? And so could you sort of speak on this question about, do you think that America needs a secular right-wing movement? Do you think that's sufficient? Or do you think to some extent religion is necessary, or maybe the only authentic right-wing conservative movement that can fix the country?
Well, the whole point of Logos is to transcend this artificial distinction between church and state. The question is it rational? Is what we're talking about practical reason? Can we agree that first of all, can we agree that there is an order to the universe? Can we agree on that? Well, the answer is no, because we pretty much can't agree on anything. And people go to school in many ways to be made stupid. And one of the main ways you're made stupid is accepting Darwinian evolution, which basically says that shit happened. That's it. That's it. There's no explanation. There's no order. This order created itself. There was a dance craze about 10 years ago called the New Atheism. It was Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and Daniel Dennett, and somebody else whose name I forget. But they made incredibly stupid statements. Daniel Dennett said the universe created itself out of nothing, or something very small. That's got to be one of the stupidest statements in the history of philosophy. So we have to come to some type of understanding of, is there a God or not? Now, the belief, the point I'm trying to make here with Logos is, belief in the existence of God is not an article of faith. It's an article of reason. It can be proven that there has to be a God. Okay? Once we clear the ground there now, you eliminate a whole series of fruitless discussions with atheists, because atheism is no longer an ontological problem. It's a psychological problem, largely because atheists have problems with their fathers. That's the issue that we need to clarify first of all. I think I can clarify this issue to any audience in the world. As a matter of fact, it was in India that a Hindu boy asked me the question of whether I could prove the existence of God. So it's a conversation that everybody wants to know. And this conversation will transcend this artificial distinction between church and state, which was established during the time of the Enlightenment to avoid the religious wars that flowed from Protestantism. This has been the default setting of our culture for its entirety, from the beginning. Now, I'm not trying to say that separation of church and state existed then as it does today. That's not true. It created after World War II as a weapon against the Catholic Church. But this notion that religion is somehow a private matter and that nobody will ever agree on fundamental basic issues has led to the situation we are in today. Because if you remove religion or any discussion of Logos from the public sphere, what you're doing is basically handing the public sphere over to the rich and the powerful. And that's the situation we're in right now. Okay, they are the one who control the discussion. They are the ones who tell us what we're allowed to think, and they appoint proxy warriors to do their bidding for them. And at this moment in time, the main proxy warrior for the oligarchs is the homosexual.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great answer. It's so true. I think you're exactly right about the artificial distinction between church and state, because at its core, it is about metaphysics, right? It is about coming to that common ground about agreement. Do we have a God? Do we have the same facts here? Are we living in the same reality? So I think that's 100% correct. But shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to get into some more topical things. I know you've written a book called The Slaughter of the Cities, and it talks about sort of the ethnic groups in the inner cities and the relationship, in your mind, in the United States between the Protestants, the Jews, and the Catholics, which you call are the three different races in the country. And so as somebody who's living in the western suburbs of Chicago, and I see what goes on the nightly news, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate, people that live maybe around LA or New York City or live around the big cities, we see nothing but ruin, chaos, just terrible things happening in our cities. And a lot of people on the right, a lot of the mainstream type people will tell us that the reason for this is, well, it's democratic policies, right? It's left-wing policies, it's things like welfare. And so I was wondering if you could expand and explain a little bit of your ideas about, why are our cities the way they are? What has been the genesis of the modern city? And particularly looking at Chicago, what has gone on in a city like Chicago?
Yeah, Chicago is a great example. It's one of the cities that I covered in my book, The Slaughter of Cities, Urban Renewal as Ethnic Cleansing. So basically what we're talking about is the time going back to World War II. A Swede by the name of Gunnar Myrdal comes over here and fronts for a book. They claim he wrote it, but he couldn't have written it. And it's called The American Dilemma, and it's about race. And Myrdal says that what it's really about is social engineering. Okay, the war is going on. Myrdal says when this war is over, there's going to be a new regime in place. You are not going to have the old freedoms that you used to have. You will not be able to decide where you want to live the way you used to do that, and so on and so forth. Okay? Now, what he didn't say was that this was declaring war on the ethnic neighborhood in cities like Chicago. And the ethnic neighborhood was, for the most part, the Catholic ethnic neighborhood. So it was declaring war on Catholics in Chicago. That's what it was about. It was called social engineering. And so the beginning, almost the year, actually literally the year after World War II ends, we have a riot in Airport Park. And this is the beginning of basically a civil war in the city of Chicago. What happened at this time is that blacks were hauled up from the South. There was a labor shortage during the war. The blacks, who were the sharecroppers in the South, were the only really source of labor available to make up for the 11 million men who've been shipped off to Europe. So these were people brought in to work in the factories. They were deliberately placed in these ethnic neighborhoods. The classic example is Detroit, St. Louis, the King Parish. It's a Polish parish. Detroit is not an island. It's not Manhattan. There's huge amounts of empty space there. And so the pastor of St. Louis, the King Parish, the Polish pastor, is writing to Washington saying, "Why are you building projects in our neighborhood?" Well, the answer is because we're going to bust up your neighborhood. But of course, they couldn't say that, but that's exactly what was going on here. The black people from the South became the proxy warriors of their day for the oligarchs, and their job was to basically drive the Catholics out of their neighborhoods, okay? So that when you live in Chicago, you're Polish, or you're Italian, or you're Irish, or you're German, okay? And when the black people come and they drive you out of their neighborhoods, you move to the suburb, and at that point, you become white. And one of the greatest triumphs of the social engineers during this period of time was convincing Catholics that they were white. The classic example of this was Martin Luther King. This is an iconic moment in Chicago history. Martin Luther King shows up in Chicago in 1966, and no one knows why he's there. The black ministers wrote a letter, published a letter, full-page ad in one of the Chicago papers telling them to go back home because you don't understand Chicago. There are no segregated water fountains in Chicago. So why are you here? So Martin Luther King shows up in Marquette Park, 1966, steps out of his car and gets hit on the head with a rock. Well, who are throwing the rocks? Well, the people of Marquette Park. Well, what are the people of Marquette Park? Well, before Martin Luther King showed up, they were Lithuanians and they were Catholics. As soon as Martin Luther King shows up, they become white. And at this point, they lost the battle, because as soon as you're white, you're a racist. And what we've seen over this period of time, from then all the way up to today, it's the same political thing, getting more and more draconian, more and more ruthless in the extermination of ideas that they don't like, and the literal subjugation of certain populations, the dispersal of certain populations because they have been identified as bad people. That's the story of Chicago in a nutshell, but it's also the story of every single city in the North and the East. And now what I'm realizing now, I did a show with Henrik on Red Ice. It was the story of Sweden. How about that? They were doing the same thing. Oh yeah, Gunnar Myrdal came from Sweden. And Ingmar Bergman and that crowd, and a guy named Harry Schein, who doesn't sound Swedish to me, we're doing it in Sweden. And I just did a show with Faith Goldie, and guess what? They did it in Canada too. So what you're talking about is a huge experiment in manipulating the populations of all of the countries of North America and Western Europe as a form of bringing these groups under control that has existed and developed and become worse and worse to this day.
I think that's some very fascinating history, and it's totally true. You know, I think you'd be hard-pressed to look at all the cities in North America, you know, the United States and Canada, or in Europe, and you see the kind of division and chaos and the problems there. And it's hard to say that that is simply the result of Democrat policy, the result of unintended consequences, as opposed to a deliberate attempt at social control. It's hard to see anything else other than that going on. And I personally can attest to that. You know, my parents come from the city of Chicago, and we have seen firsthand the destruction of the ethnic neighborhoods, particularly on my mom's side, came up in an Italian neighborhood. You know, our roots go on Taylor Street, which was once Little Italy, is now totally Hispanic. And so I think you're exactly right. Tragic, but it is exactly right. And so tell me a little bit how this plays into, because I think you have a very interesting take on this in America. A lot of the dissident right, a lot of the reactionaries look at America and they look at the demographic future of America and they see white, black, Hispanic, Asian, you know, the different ethnic groups. And I've heard you in different interviews, and I think you write in the Slaughter Cities that you see it a little bit differently. You see the real ethnic categories, or the real breakdown of these different demographic groups, as opposed to being all the various ethnicities, more so reflected in their religious traditions, the Protestants, the Catholics, and the Jews. And so could you extrapolate and explain a little bit about how that relationship between these groups works and how they identify and what that's going to look like moving forward?
Yeah, the theory is a sociological theory, and it was called the triple melting pot, and it was created in the 1930s to try to explain ethnic existence or ethnic development in the United States of America. Now, everybody has pretty much had the same experience. Whether you're Mexican now or whether you were Irish 100 years ago, it's pretty much the same experience. You come here, it's a totally new country. You're brought here because you're cheap labor. They want you to mow the lawns and do the crappy jobs. And then you settle into a neighborhood or a parish, if you're Catholic, where you can talk to the people, which is important, because if you're Polish, you can't talk to the people here. And you can't talk to other Catholics either. And so as a result, we have a city like South Bend, where within a block, you've got the Polish parish and the Irish parish and the German parish. Because when those people came over here, they were all Catholic, but they couldn't talk to each other. So over a period of 3 generations, what happens is you lose your identification with your country of origin, but you do not lose your ethnic identity. Your ethnic identity becomes your religion. And so in other words, America is a country with 3 ethnic groups based on 3 religions. I didn't figure this out until I did a book on Yugoslavia, when I realized Yugoslavia is America, America is Yugoslavia. Instead of Protestant, Catholic, Jew, it's Serb, Croat, and Muslim, but there are 3 ethnic groups, and they're always fighting each other in Yugoslavia and the United States. The difference is everybody knows they fight each other in Yugoslavia, but in America, we're all supposed to be Americans. In America, they have things like the melting pot pageant, which was put on by the propaganda ministry during World War I, which is basically the ethnic groups show up in their costumes in a park, like a baseball field. They march into a paper mache a melting pot, and then they march out wearing bowler hats and singing the Star Spangled Banner. That's a fact. That happened. That is an illusion. Okay, because what they're saying is that you lose your ethnic identity. No, that's not true. Your ethnic identity changes. And what happens is that you become a Catholic, a Protestant, or a Jew. So if you come from Germany, okay, at the beginning, you will be speaking with other Germans, and you live in places like Cincinnati, and you become this kind of German, generic German. But over the course of 3 generations, that group will split up into Protestants and Catholics, because that is the division in Germany. And this is a real identity, because there is a real content to being a Catholic or a Protestant or a Jew, unlike being white, which has no identity whatsoever. Being white simply means the negative of being black. And so as a result, it can be easily manipulated by the oligarchs. And that is precisely what we're seeing in our day. Okay, the promotion of white nationalism on the one side and black nationalism on the other. Black Lives Matter is being supported by George Soros because what they want is racial conflict, because the government then can come in and say, I'm the referee, I'm the impartial guy, we have solved this, let me take over, I'll take control. That's the situation we're in now. The only thing that's changed over this period of time is the identity of the proxy warriors. So after World War II, the proxy warriors were black people from the South, okay, and now they are homosexuals. The homosexual is the ideal citizen, and I say this from experience coming from South Bend, Indiana, where our homosexual mayor is now living out the narcissistic fantasy that he's nurtured from his childhood. He thinks he's going to be elected president of the United States of America. You are being subjected to a same version in Chicago, I hear, another type of narcissistic fantasy. That's the situation now. That is what's changed. That is the avant-garde of the revolution right now.
I think that's actually a very interesting explanation, an interesting take, because I think that a lot of people understand generally the problem of different populations being used against one another, different underclasses or fringe classes being used as proxies or foot soldiers against the majority or something. But the first time I heard your idea, which you say actually comes from that 1930s book about the Jew, the Catholics, the Protestants, I think it's really fresh and adds a little bit of depth, because I think you do see a lot of dissonance in these general racial categories. I do think that is perhaps a little bit of a problem for something like, pan-white identity or pan-European identity, because you do see, I think, those cultural divisions. I think you see them in Europe. I think you see them in America. So I think that's definitely sort of a cogent explanation to sort of provide for that. But moving along a little bit onto a different topic, this week we did a show on America First about the 19th Amendment. As you may know, it has been I think it's 100 years on Thursday or on Tuesday of the 19th Amendment being passed, which was, of course, women gaining the right to vote. And this has been a very contentious subject on the show. I've been talking about this for a long time, and really, I guess the fundamental question is, what is the role of women in politics as voters, as politicians, as pundits? And as somebody who is Catholic, as somebody who is religious, obviously our doctrine says that there is sort of a specific role for women. We don't necessarily believe in this stuff about female empowerment. We believe in the gender roles. And so I was wondering, what is your take on that as we reflect on 100 years of women's suffrage? What do you think is the effect of the female suffrage, and what do you think the role of women in politics ought to be?
Well, let's be honest here. Women can be proxy warriors too. And the name for the female who's a proxy warrior is feminist. And so what you saw over the intermediary step, okay, between the black as the proxy warrior in the cities like Chicago and the homosexual as the proxy warrior today, was the woman as the proxy warrior. And this was known as the feminist movement, a movement that was controlled by Jews. The most prominent feminists were all Jews. Betty Friedan, Betty Goldstein was her maiden name, was a communist. And what she saw and what many people saw at that time was a development of class struggle into gender struggle. In other words, you can pit one group against each other. And what better way to do this than pitting male against female? Because it goes all the way back to the beginning, doesn't it? You know, Adam and Eve had problems in paradise. And if they have problems in paradise, you're going to have problems here too. And so there are people who can come in now and instrumentalize this, the most sacred of all relationships, because it creates new life, and turn it into a field of warfare, which is precisely what happened during the 1970s. Okay, the reason I am not a professor at a Catholic college anymore is because of feminism. Because the feminists had taken over what was a female Catholic institution and turned it into a feminist institution for social engineering young Catholic ladies. Okay, the oligarchs were very interested in this. Okay, for one very simple reason: if you if you put women in the workforce, you will effectively double the workforce, and if you double the workforce, you will half wages. Wages will be cut in half. It's simple mathematics. It's simple supply and demand. And that was the reason why feminism was promoted by all of the oligarchic institutions during the 1970s. That was the purpose of the Equal Rights Amendment, which did get defeated, by the way. But it was the point here would be they would come up with slogans like equal pay for equal work. Who can argue with equal pay for equal work? Well, you can't unless you know what the previous formula was, which was the family wage. During the 1950s, we had a great surge of prosperity based on the fact that a man was now entitled to earn a wage that would allow him to support a family. This is a crucial building block for a successful economy. The main reason, I cover this in my book, Barren Metal, which is a history of capitalism as the conflict between labor and usury. The main reason that Florence, which was the most advanced culture in Europe in the 15th century, the main reason that culture failed is because they refused to pay a family wage. If you do not pay a family wage, that means women cannot bear children. A man cannot afford to support his family. If women cannot bear children, then the workforce disappears overnight or in the course of one generation, which is precisely what happened to Florence, which went from being the most prosperous economy in Europe at that time to being a museum, which is what it is today. Okay, that's what happened during this period of time. So feminism, by promoting women's rights, effectively destroyed the ability of a man to provide for his family. This then led to the situation we have today, which, if you're lucky, you and your wife will have a job, and you and your wife will have to work, both of you, to achieve what your father and your grandfather got simply by having the man work. That is the net result of feminism. That is the net result of the long-term result of the 19th Amendment. That is how women got weaponized, and that's the situation we live in today. So I'm sitting in New York City on a bench, Washington Square in Greenwich Village, and there's a woman who's sitting next to another woman, and she's saying, I was eating my cheese sandwich on my sofa last night, and I burst into tears because I realized I have no friends, I have no family, I have nothing but this job that sucks the labor out of me for 70 hours a week. My life is over. Well, maybe you should tell, because this was the ideal job. She was a lawyer in a big-time firm in New York City, in Manhattan. She got to live in Manhattan, which is the goal of all these feminists. And what they gave her was a high salary in exchange for her life. For her life. She has no life. Okay? When I was 21 years old, I got married. Even though I hadn't graduated from college yet. That will be 50 years ago in August. Okay, and one of the main things on my mind was that I wanted a life. And I couldn't have a life by myself. I had to have a life with someone else. And it had to be the woman that I eventually married. And we've been together for 50 years. So this is my what I'm trying to tell the 20-year-olds now is that a high-paying job, even though they are disappearing, you're not going to get one anyway. But a high-paying job is no substitute for a life.
That's a great answer. It's great for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think it's so important to talk about the economic consequences of feminism. I think that's probably the last thing a lot of people consider. A lot of young people are introduced to anti-feminism or skepticism, criticism about so-called third or fourth wave feminism because of its effects on things like video games or movies. But I think far less considered is, like you said, the economic consequence, which is the halving of wages, which is the effect on the labor force, which is so critical, so important in explaining a variety of things. Like you said, the fertility rates being predominant, that if you don't have a man in the house making family wage, you can't have kids. And also great answer because the life advice, and congratulations on 50 years. If it's 50 years this year, very big achievement. Of course. And great to see be so much divorce these days. So truly multifaceted answer there, and it's good to hear because the feminism stuff, I'm with you, is probably the worst, right? We're going to shift gears a little bit because we want to get your take on a couple of different subjects. And so I want to hear what you have to say about this next subject, and then we're going to take questions from the audience via the super chats. Are you okay with that? Are you down with fielding some questions? Okay, great.
That's fine.
So shifting gears a little bit, we want to fit in one more topic here. There's been a lot of talk lately about Iran. Of course, President Trump came into office, he got inaugurated in 2017, and it seemed to me, my analysis has been, that the focus from the outset was on North Korea, as opposed to Iran in the previous administration. But gradually, I think over the last year, we've seen this intensification or escalation of our conflict with Iran. We see today, as an example, we talked about this yesterday. They talked about putting 10,000 troops in the Middle East to so-called, counter Iran's influence. Now today they're saying they will deploy 1,500 additional troops beyond the thousands that are already in Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, to the Middle East broadly to counter Iran's influence. And now there's intelligence being brought forward about a border crossing being established between Iran and Syria. They're talking about chemical weapons again in Syria. And I know this is one of your favorite subjects. Could you explain to us a little bit about why there is all this agitation against Iran? Because, I think a lot of people look at the situation in the Middle East and Europe, and they say, Saudi Arabia seems to be sort of a nefarious actor. Turkey seems to be pretty not so good. Israel may be not so great to the United States. Why is it we have such a problem with Iran? What is driving this inertia to go to war with Iran?
The Jews are driving us into another war in the Middle East. I've said this before. I said it in Iran. I was in Iran a year ago. I told the Iranians, there are 3 reasons why you do not have a nuclear agreement. Sheldon Adelson, Paul Singer, and Bernard Marcus, 3 rich Jews control our foreign policy. It's that simple. Why is that the case? Because Donald Trump needed the support of this group of people in order to fend off the attempt of the deep state to basically drive him out of office. This is a pact we call a Faustian pact. It's a pact with the devil, okay? And it has created the most dangerous situation geopolitically since the Bay of Pigs. And I was there. I was in high school when that happened. So I remember. So there's a simple answer. The reason I wrote The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit is I watched this country again get driven into a war in the Middle East by the Jews. They were called neoconservatives at the time. Everybody knew they were Jews. Everybody knew this war was being fought for Israel and not for American interests, and yet no one could seem to stop it. Okay? That's the issue. Now we have a repeat of what happened then. What is the net result of the war in Iraq? The war in Iraq eliminated the main opponent to Iran. So the Jews, in a sense, created Iran as the regional power. And now, once again, American troops are going to have to die for Israel. It's very simple. Everybody knows it, but no one's allowed to say it. Because if you say something like this, they call you an anti-Semite. That's the situation.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think you're exactly right. Very simple, right? Not very complicated. It's pretty fair and plain to see. We talk about that issue a lot on this show. Even you look at the clean break memo in 1996, you don't really even have to look too deep to find what is pretty apparent, pretty obvious, and obvious to everybody in Washington, D.C. And you look at, for example, something like Syria, where they're now blaming the Assad regime for chemical weapons attacks. This is, I think, the fourth or the fifth such claim by this administration. The first chemical weapons claim was made in April 2017. There was another one in April 2018. We did missile strikes both times in Syria. What do you think about the situation in Syria generally, the civil war there, our involvement? Obviously, there was a call for a troop withdrawal in December. It never materialized. Do you think it's the same forces in Syria that's driving us in Iran, or is it something different? What is your examination of the current situation there?
Yeah, well, every time Donald Trump tries to pull out of Syria, there's a poison gas attack. Okay, so that's not coincidence. But the situation I meant Syria. Every time he tries to pull out of Syria, the situation in Syria is very simple. It followed from Hillary Clinton's destruction of Libya and her murdering Muammar Gaddafi. That worked like a charm, and so the next, according to that plan you mentioned, the next stop on that line was Syria, and at this point, it didn't work. Okay, for the first time, the whole proxy warrior thing, all those proxy warriors that got sent into Libya, they were not the Libyan people. They were foreigners who were trying to overthrow Gaddafi because they were being paid to do so. At that point, after that happened, we moved them to Syria, where they became known as freedom fighters. They were also an alien group fighting there. But at this point, Russia finally regained its strength as a world power. They combined with Iran and with Hezbollah, and they defeated the United States in Syria. That war was, the United States lost that war. They're trying to keep some type of residual force there so that they can stir up trouble, which is probably what they're trying to do right now, but they lost that war. Once they lose that war, okay, Israel feels threatened. And once Israel feels threatened, they have to come over here and yank the chain of the lapdogs in Congress. You remember Benjamin Netanyahu coming here, did it twice, shows up, just swaggers in, I'm going to speak to Congress, whether Obama likes it or not, and he gets 27 standing ovations from the lapdogs in Congress because they're all taking IPAC money. They're all taking Jewish money. Okay, and even the New York Times reported if they didn't jump up and give a standing ovation, IPAC was there to take down their name and to fund an opponent to them in the next election. This is the simple fact of our political system right now. And the fact that nobody can talk about it is a sign of how tyrannical the situation has become. This is not the reason I voted for Donald Trump. I voted for Donald Trump because I heard America first in his voice. That's not what we got. We have Israel first now, and all I can pray for is that we don't go to war, because America is faced with a choice at this point. The American empire is going to go down. The American empire has already lost control of the Eurasian landmass, which is something that the Anglo-American empire is never allowed to do, but it's already happened. So the only choice now is, are we going to have a peaceful end to the American empire through negotiation, or are we going to have a violent end through an invasion of Iran, which will lead to the violent end of the American empire and probably the end of Israel as well? That's the choice we're faced with right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's such a succinct way to put it, really in the broader strokes about this climax of the end of the American empire and the destruction, the fallout, and what sort of a path we'll choose. I think that's obviously what's happening, and also true about the tyranny of the Israel lobby. You know, something that I've learned as somebody who's been in Washington, D.C., and, you know, I'm a younger guy, but I talk to a lot of people in the city, and as I've been operating with a lot of political people, it's something that you realize is not even a secret. It's probably the openest and most obvious secret in Washington, D.C., that everybody there knows about, that everybody participates in on a daily basis, but yet, as you said, nobody is allowed to talk about on mainstream media. And I would venture to guess most of the American people have no clue about it. But everybody in D.C. is completely and well aware of it. But that's a great take, and we appreciate your honesty, your candor on that subject. Not many people are willing to go there. And we're going to move into our super chats here. I'm going to pull it up on YouTube, and we'll take a look. I'm going to select the best ones for you. Typically, the super chats, they tend to vary a little bit in quality. You know, some of them are very good. Some of them tend to be a little bit like spam, so we're going to find some good super chats here for you, and we'll see what your take on some of these things are. Let's take a look and see. We've got one from Patty McGill, one of your biggest fans. I'd be remiss if I didn't read this one. She says, subscribe to Culture Wars magazine. It's the epicenter of counter-revolution. It will explain the chaos in the world and give you the tools to save the European people. Mother of God, pray for us. Could you explain, sort of going off on that, could you explain a little bit about Culture Wars magazine for people that may be familiar with your books or your interviews, but not so much familiar with Culture Wars?
Yeah, when I was fired from St. Mary's College, I started a magazine, got out of academia. That magazine was called Fidelity, and it was about the situation in the Catholic Church, the battle in the Catholic Church, the situation that led up to a situation where a professor could be fired at a Catholic college for being against abortion. By the mid-'90s, I realized that after I'd done the biography of Cardinal Kroll of Philadelphia, I realized that the source of this problem was not inside the Catholic Church. It was outside the Catholic Church. Father Hesburgh, the president of Notre Dame, was working for the Rockefellers. He was working with the Rockefellers to overturn the church's teaching on contraception. And so I saw similarities between that situation and the situation in Germany in the 1870s. It was called Kulturkampf in Germany, and I translated it as Culture Wars in the 1990s. And I think it was because through this instrument, I've been able to talk about the situation as it exists. I've been able to explain how psychological warfare works. And I think people, once they understand it, it doesn't work anymore, especially the form of psychological warfare known as sexual liberation. Once you know that it's a trap, we're all weak. We all have these desires that get out of the control of reason. But if you know you're walking into a trap, it's not quite the same, So that's what Culture Wars is. That's what it's been up to today. We have people from all over the world reporting. And also we have a discussion, a really intelligent discussion in the letters column. So you're linked up with people who are, it's more in depth. I mean, some people say the magazine is an obsolete form of technology, but it does have the ability to deal with issues in depth in a way that you don't get on the internet.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. And it's great because there are so few resources these days where I think people can go to for reliable, authentic, logos-oriented information or conversation. And, on the magazine being, maybe anachronistic or out of date, I would say the magazine is actually the future because you see all across the internet people are getting shut down and, blocked and censored. So, looking into the future, maybe the magazine or something done by mail or by print might be the only viable path forward. So it's pretty great.
You're absolutely right. I have the names of people, everyone who's bought a book. And if I get shut down, I can still contact people, for example, when the Logos book comes out, which shouldn't be too far in the future. So you're right. It is a way of communicating that the oligarchs cannot destroy. They can't interfere with it. They can't deplatform you if you have a magazine.
Exactly. Well, yeah, and that's why that infrastructure is so important. I think, in 5 or 10 years when things really start, things are already pretty rough with censorship, but when, you're going to find there's going to be like 1 or 2 people left standing, I think you'll find that people who have that kind of a print catalog or they have that kind of a registry or, a database of names or something, that's going to be very valuable. But we're going to take a look. We've got a few more questions here. Here's another one. It says, Doctor, can we agree that only Catholicism ever defended European culture and that the Catholic Church built European culture? Can you explain the process? Was not Martin Luther, I assume, a tool of Jewish subversion? Pretty good question.
Okay, first of all, Martin Luther was not a tool of Jewish subversion. He wrote two very strident articles against the Jews. Okay, the second one being especially strident. The second one, by the way, violating the church's teaching, which was Sicut Judaeus Nomen, because Luther was actually advocating harming the Jew, which the Catholic Church never did. Okay, so that being said, the Catholic Church, Europe would not exist without the Catholic Church. Okay, the Roman Empire collapsed when my barbarian ancestors crossed the Danube and the Rhine and began looting and pillaging, which they did for centuries. The only thing that turned my barbarian Germanic ancestors into civilized people was the Catholic Church. I got into trouble just yesterday with Richard Spencer.
I saw that.
I said, if it weren't for the Catholic Church, Europe would be Africa. I didn't mean that. I'm not trying to denigrate Africa. I'm just saying that Africa never had any unity. Geographically, it didn't have any unity. You have above the Sahara, you got Muslim culture. Below the Sahara, you got a black culture, which is animist, traditionally animist. On the coast, you have all kinds of colonies. There's no unity to Africa whatsoever. The only unity that is emerging in Africa now is through Christianity. And that's exactly what happened in Europe during this period of time. Okay, my barbarian German ancestors loved chasing pigs through the forest. Okay, that's not a high culture. They also worship trees. That's not high religion. And they were smart enough to understand that Christianity offered them something superior to that, and they accepted it. And as a result, over a 1,000-year period, they learned how to work. The main effect of Christianity in the Germanic countries that made up the Holy Roman Empire was learning how to work, which they learned at the hands of the Benedictine monks, whose motto was ora et labora. That's what created Europe. 1,000 years ago, Europe was on the brink of becoming Africa because they had the Vikings. I don't want to offend any of the Scandinavians, but the Vikings were barbarians constantly sailing up the rivers of France, burning down everything they found in their way, okay, destroying culture with a vengeance. And they had the Saracens coming up from the bottom. It looked as if Europe was going to die strangled in the cradle and the failed experiment after the failure of the Roman Empire. The only thing that saved Europe from that fate during this period of time was the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church provided an operating system that worked on Logos. And Logos is the order of the universe, and that order of the universe got implemented in one of the greatest civilizations and social orders in the history of man. So I hope that answers your question.
That's a terrific answer. As a Mediterranean, I have to heartily agree with your characterization of Germanics, Nordics. I think you're right. The true civilization was on the Mediterranean there. So that's actually a great answer, very very cogent, and I think a lot of people in the audience will appreciate that, because people were a little bit skeptical, I think, of your tweet. So I think that's actually a great explanation. I know a lot of people are texting me, you got to ask him about the Africa tweet. You know, what did he mean by this? You know, but yeah, that's a great explanation.
I said before, I did a book on Julius Nyerere. I was in Tanzania 3 years ago, and there's this brochure. And it's a partnership between the Diocese of Mbinga and the Diocese of Würzburg. Okay, Diocese of Mbinga is founded in 1983. The Diocese of Würzburg is founded in 830. What's the difference between Würzburg and Mbinga? It's 1,000 years of Christianity, specifically Catholicism, specifically the Benedictines teaching the Germans how to work, where they created the most skilled workforce in the world. Why do you think people buy BMWs all over the world? That's because the difference between Africa, I've said it before, I get in trouble every time I say it, but the difference between Africa and Würzburg and Mbinga is 1,000 years of learning how to work at the feet of the Benedictines.
There it is, simple as. I think that's a great explanation. We're trying to move on here. We got a ton of questions here. People are very excited. And a lot of interesting topics here. We've got one from AIBot who says, Dr. Jones, what are your thoughts concerning space exploration and potential future extraterrestrial colonization? How do you reconcile modern science with classical faith?
Space exploration is something that robots should do. Okay, it's a waste of time, but if it's robots, okay. This talk by who is it? Jeff Bezos now wants to colonize space. Be the first guy up there, Jeff. We'll wave goodbye, and then someone else will take over Amazon and give retailers a better deal while you're off colonizing space. Complete waste of time. You cannot do it. It is impossible. What a man who spent time in the space station. 30 years, which is just orbiting around the Earth, could hardly walk when he got back. He was a total basket case medically from just circling the Earth. If you go to Mars, you won't be able to walk out of the spaceship. Your bones will collapse the minute you step on that planet because they will have been totally corrupted and weakened by zero gravity. It is a complete waste of time. Okay, it's a complete illusion. It's driven by the fact that you're wrecking this planet. The solution is let's deal with this planet. Let's get a better operating system in place here. Forget about that.
Interesting take. Interesting take. So not very thrilled with the space exploration. Noted. That's a little bit of a controversial one because I think there is, obviously a lot of Catholics do fall into the traditionalist camp. I don't think you describe yourself as a traditionalist. So there is always the question of, do we embrace the technology or this, futuristic type stuff? So that's it's interesting to get your take on that. We've got one from Harold Haroldson who says, what are your thoughts on Malcolm X and how would you compare him to MLK? Who had the better vision for Black America?
Malcolm X Malcolm X was a Black nationalist. And in a sense, he was following in the footsteps of Marcus Garvey. And Marcus Garvey was basically destroyed by the NAACP, which is a Jewish organization, because the Jews didn't want Black nationalism. They don't want any kind of nationalism except their own nationalism. So this is the tradition that he tried to follow. He didn't like Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was being paid to promote integration and was instrumental in, I think, creating a loss of Black identity. I think that what happened, to get back to Philadelphia, one of the worst things that ever happened in Philadelphia was that the Blacks, the Jesuits in North Philadelphia were watching the Blacks come up from the South. They're destroying their neighborhoods, and they go to Cardinal Doherty in the 1930s, and they say, let's create a Black ethnic parish. I think it was a great idea because it fit in exactly with every other ethnic parish. It gave the Blacks an ethnic identity, and Doherty, for some reason, turned them down, and that was the beginning of the end, because then the Blacks became the super ethnic group, the ethnic group that never did anything wrong, the ethnic group that became the proxy warriors. And they suffered as a result of that. And Martin Luther King was part of that instrument that destroyed this aspect of Black culture. The Blacks in, I think it was Charleston, South Carolina, did the same thing the Blacks in Chicago did. They had a Black establishment, a local establishment. Martin Luther King shows up and he obliterates the local establishment and creates a national establishment in its place. Well, that's pretty much what happened here. That's what happened across the board. And so I think that the result was that the Blacks lost their ethnic identity. And as a result, they suffered like every other group that loses its ethnic identity. They became these rootless people living in high-rise buildings on the south side of Chicago that were prey to all sorts of the vices that go along with being that type of immigrant group. So in many ways, I can sympathize with what Malcolm X was doing.
I think that's a great take. And I think you're definitely right. The cult of Martin Luther King Jr. is, I think we can all agree we're not a fan of that. So a great take on that. We've got another one here. This is from Zirconium, who says, Dr. Jones, what is your ancestral nation? So I assume that means heritage. He says, it seems like everyone, or maybe a lot of people in the right wing, there's a lot of ethnic and religious division in the right wing as it stands. Is that healthy for the state of the movement?
Well, ethnicity is part of nature. White is a completely artificial creation. It's a negative creation. So I am biracial, okay? I'm Irish and German, okay? I say biracial, everybody gets upset. Everybody gets upset, okay? Madison Grant, who is the father of white racism in this country, did not believe in white guys. He believed that there were three races in Europe: the Teutonic race, the Alpine race, and the Mediterranean race. He used the word race to describe all of these groups. He did not believe in white guys. He did not believe in allowing either the Alpine race or the Mediterranean race into the United States of America and change the immigration laws to keep Poles, Italians and Eastern Europeans in general out of America. He did not believe in white guys. I just had a conversation with a man of Swedish extraction whose grandfather told him that he had worked in the steel mills of Chicago and he was persecuted by the Poles. Now, in his grandfather's generation, there was no such thing as a white guy. You were a Pole or you were a Swede, and you were fighting over that job that you had in the steel mills. I'm saying this is a real ethnic identity. I've already talked about how that mutates into the American Catholic religious ethnic identity. That's the real reality of this situation.
I think that's totally true. And speaking as somebody who is the child of ethnics, I guess you could say, in America, it is definitely a fact that the white racial thing is totally a construct. I have Irish family, and I hear the way that they talk about some of the other groups in Chicago, the Poles or Eastern Europeans or other people. And I could tell you, this sort of love fest with other white people or white racial consciousness, maybe it's a little bit far off, because there still is a little bit of ethnic division. So I think that's a good answer. We've got another question. I think it's a very good question from David Sperner, a little bit more practical. He writes, what are recommended career paths for young men? He says, I see teaching, military, and trades as good ways forward, but what are some of your insights on that?
We bought a house here 40 years ago. Over a period of 40 years, it started to fall down, and I met a young man. I knew his father. This is a young man who has skills as a carpenter. He fixed our garage for us. I'm saying he's got no student loan debt. He has a skill that everyone needs. People have been tricked into getting degrees that are worthless and going into debt to get them. I'm saying that the smart thing is to have some type of skill where people will pay you directly, not as a wage earner. That's a bad situation. Okay, the wage is the criterion of a just economy. You have to have a family wage, but that's not America. Let's face it. America was built on cheap labor. The wage situation is worse now than it was when I was growing up, and worse than when my father was growing up. So what I see is these things like this, my friend, my 28-year-old friend who knows carpentry and can work with that and can make a living and probably start a family with what he can do with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. I was in college and it was like $65,000 for tuition, and people are graduating with a degree in international relations. That's why I dropped out. I'm like, what am I even going to do with that? So that's a great answer. We're running out of time here, so we want to close off. We've got one last question. I think this is actually a very important one. Technically, Max writes, please ask about the Lavender Mafia in the Vatican. I think that's a perfect question to close on. What are your thoughts about, I guess, the gay mafia in the Vatican?
Yeah, he's talking about a letter that Archbishop Vigano wrote in the aftermath of Cardinal McCarrick being exposed as a homosexual. So the question is, how could someone who was a homosexual rise to the highest level in the church? And the answer is because of the gay mafia. Okay, what happened over this period of time is you had an attack on the Catholic Church through people. The plan was concocted by Wilhelm Reich in the 1930s in Austria, basically sexualize the clergy. You sexualize the clergy, they will immediately lose any type of connection with God, and then you can just, they will leave of their own accord, which is precisely what happened in the 60s. Sexualize the clergy, the heterosexuals decide to leave because they want to get married, and they can't be married in the church, and this concentrates the percentage of homosexuals in the clergy. Over a period of time, these people reached positions of power, and they could determine the course of church policy, which is precisely what McCarrick did. So right now we have a crisis because the church, that last synod in Rome, refused to deal with homosexuality as the root of the problem. And you've got orders like the Jesuits, which is basically the avant-garde of the homosexual movement in the church, and Jesuits like James Martin, who should be disciplined, but can preach homosexuality, can preach sodomy with impunity. So you're right. There is a crisis right now in the church over the homosexual mafia.
That's a great answer, and very important because, so many people, they watch this show. I think they watch your content, Dr. Jones, and they like the idea of Catholicism. They're sold on the content, they're sold on logos, they're sold on everything, and unfortunately it seems like this sex scandal, the Lavender Mafia stuff really is sort of pushing people away. So it's good that we have people like you. Yeah, go ahead.
If you're going to wait to join the Catholic Church until there are no sinners in the church, you're going to have a long wait. Okay, that's never been the case. That's why Jesus Christ chose Peter as the first pope to show that you're not going to be perfect here. He denied Christ 3 times. So the church is always run by sinners. It's always a scandal to the purity of Jesus Christ. But that doesn't change the fact that it is still the cutting edge of Logos and the source of grace, and that the grace that can save your life and make a success out of your life.
That's a perfect answer and a great note to close on. Dr. Jones, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It's been a pleasure talking with you and a great honor. I know everybody's been excited this forever. So thanks so much, and maybe we'll have to do it again sometime, all right?
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right, thanks. Take it easy. Bye-bye.
You too.
All right. Well, there you have it. We just spoke with E. Michael Jones there. Let me get rid of this window capture here. Let me get rid of this display capture. There you have it. Finally, our interview with E. Michael Jones. The coveted interview. We finally secured it. 2 years in the making. So we hope you enjoyed that. And hey, a big thank you to the doctor, Dr. E. Michael Jones, for joining us. I thought it was a terrific interview. He's a great sport, obviously a great source of knowledge, and a great scholar. Here, let me mute my notifications there for a second. We'll get back to him after the show. So what we're going to do is we'll finish off these super chats. We'll read the rest of them, and then that should do it for us for the evening, all right? So let me get my headphones off so I can hear myself a little bit. Very good interview. And I hope that we broach some topics which we haven't heard Dr. Jones talk about so much. One of the difficulties, I think, with interviewing somebody as prolific as Dr. Jones is there's just so much content out there. It's hard to do an interview where you do explore some untreaded subjects or things that haven't been discussed so much. I've seen him on just about every live stream for the past so many weeks. The guy's a workhorse. It's incredible. And, for a baby boomer, he's pretty cool. And he's pretty hip with the technology and the live streams. But very explosive interview. I think, I don't know about you guys, but what I heard from that interview was wages, Germanics, the Alpines, the Nords, pagans. It sounds like racialists, Wignats, all these people basically blown out. Feminists, women. Seems like Dr. Jones is very much on the right side of history. If you watch this show, you watch Dr. Jones, it seems like there's pretty consistent who's on the list of who is canceled in 2019. I think Dr. Jones, he had all the right marks there, right? But we're going to take a look. We'll take a look at our super chats. We'll see what everybody's saying here. Apologize if we could not get to your question. Obviously, there's a lot of questions, only so much time. We took about 20 minutes out of the show, so I thought that was appropriate. But, maybe we'll get him on another time, and we'll be able to field some more questions. But I thought it was pretty fun. I thought we did a pretty good job of getting to as many as possible. So we'll pick up where we left off. We'll take a look at some of these super chats. I didn't want to read through all the super chats while he was sitting there because, you watch this show. If you watch this show, you know what people say in the super chats. I don't want to be talking to Dr. Jones about Walter from Drake and Josh or whatever, right? We're going to take a look. We've got Joey the Zoomer who says, rest in peace, Dad. Okay, just a perfect example. I don't even know what that means. Marl Karks says, 2 of my favorite white guys. I think Dr. Jones would have some trouble. He might say maybe your 2 favorite mixed race guys. A couple of mixed race. Obviously, he's Teutonic and Keltoid. And what am I? I'm Celt, Med, and Mexican, so native, I guess you could say. So your 2 favorite mixed race ethnic Catholics, I guess would be the appropriate term. Rolit says, when will you get E. Michael Jones on the show? Perfect, yeah. It would not be this episode of the show if we didn't get that one, right? At least once. Timed Out says, I wish I thought of that last super chat first. Yeah, okay, great. Rianne Biazzo says, have you ever had to deal with evil happas? Not yet. Not yet. Haven't had too many run-ins with Hoppas so far. Usually it's a certain other category, which Dr. Jones excoriated throughout the show. It's really more the other category, which seems to be nefarious. Not so much the Hoppas, a little bit further west in Asia. West Asia, maybe you say the furthest west, right up against the Mediterranean maybe. Those are the people we tend to run into problems with. Mr. Camus says, when are you interviewing E. Michael Jones? Yeah, thanks for that. Black Swan says, Nick, Richard heard what you said about mustaches and he is not happy. He's been hitting the wine coolers and wants to give you a piece of his mind. Yeah, we actually talked the other day. We actually talked earlier today. I think people are trying to prank us or something. Can't go into detail. We had a little bit of a discussion. Maybe I'll save that for a premium show. Who knows, right? But a little bit of a fun story there to be told. I will say the one thing, maybe the redeeming factor about Richard Spencer is I always liked the mustache. A lot of people ridicule him for the mustache. You know, there's a lot of bad blood. There's a lot of problems. But I will say I like the mustache, you know. So, Mr. New Vegas says, thanks for all the content, and thank you, Dr. Jones, for all your work. Logos is rising. Yeah, big agree. And we love Dr. Jones. A lot of great content, prolific creator. Reptargos Real says, hey, big guy, can you ask EMJ why he is dodging accepting a debate with Jay Dyer? So I missed that one. That was earlier. I believe he replied to Jay Dyer on Twitter, but I don't know. It's sort of a weird thing. Jay Dyer, this guy, I like Jay Dyer a lot. I think he's funny, and he's very intense individual. He's very aggressive when it comes to the debates. You know, it's, why won't you debate me? You know, this kind of thing, which I think is funny. So I don't know. I guess maybe we'll ask him next time. Maybe you can, hit him up on Twitter or something. But that would be an interesting, I would like to see that conversation because Jay Dyer, it seems like nobody can stop this guy. You know, as a Catholic myself, I went into the ring with him. I found myself a little bit unprepared. You know, he's got 20 years worth of study on me. And I found myself a little bit unprepared to go toe-to-toe, because Jay Dyer, he was out there, he was ready to shank me, And I mean that in a good way. I mean, he knows his stuff. But I don't see too many Catholics very eager to get in the ring and do battle with him. So, but I think that would be one to watch. I would be glad to do a pay-per-view of that one. Forget Slavoj Žižek and Peterson charging $15 to debate the Communist Manifesto. I think a pay-per-view would be Dr. Jones and Jay Dyer. Josh Sayers says, Nick, you should end this interview and have E. Michael Jones on. Thank you, Josh, for that. Wonderful. Sam Day says, how do we shake the influence of the Jewish lobby? I don't know. I guess that's the age-old question. One could say, if there were any question which matters, perhaps which has been with us for thousands of years, I think that might be the question. How do we shake this lobby? I don't know. It's anybody's guess. I think more Holocaust museums would be a start. I think another Holocaust Remembrance Day. That's my opinion. I know that might be politically incorrect to say, but maybe a little bit more foreign aid for Israel. There's missiles flying in Israel every day. I don't know if you know that. So I think that'd be a good start. Mr. Hoff says, hey, Nick, I'm going to miss the show. Can you get E. Michael Jones on again? Yeah, we'll be sure to do that. Cassie Queens of Spades Dylan says, are there eternal forms of extinct animals such as the dodo bird? Wouldn't that mean that the Logos Christ incarnate is eternally economical? Not sure what that means. I don't know if I'm equipped to answer that question. Not really even sure what you're trying to say there. Local Milkman says, I was created by a creator to be creative. Yeah, very succinct, good way of putting it. I'm a little bit jittery right now. I haven't slept in a really long time. So the only way I could do the interview today was by slonking a Monster Zero Ultra. I had to hit the sips. So if I seem a little bit edgy, if I seem like I don't know, unstable, if I seem like some kind of radioactive particle that's just, kind of going crazy, if I seem a little jittery or off the wall, I have to, full disclosure, I don't do them often. I've only drank 4 now in my lifetime, but I know it's coming across now. I think you're starting to see that I'm losing it a little bit. So just full disclosure, I did have to slunk a little bit of Monster. I haven't been sleeping so well for a variety of reasons, but just a little interjection there. Josh Sayers says, E. Michael Jones basically saying, shut the F up, lab coats. E. Michael Jones on a warpath on the show. He says, shut the F up, pagan oaks. Shut the F up, lab coats. Shut the F up, Protestants. And, transnational oligarchs. You can't really say that one. Shut the F up, Wignats and white people and Nords and Germanics. So, and women. I like it, and I'm here for it. And we're here for it. We stand. Wim says, why won't EMJ debate Jay Dyer? I don't know. I don't know. You'd have to ask him. The Bunko Man says, who's your favorite Disney princess? I don't know if that's intended for me or Dr. Jones. Maybe for Dr. Jones. Mr. Hoff says, EMJ owning liberals with facts and logic. Yep. And reason and logos. Nay. Not facts and logic with logos. That is how we're owning them. KK says that book stack, though. Very learned man. Very jealous. Certainly flexing, mogging us with the bookshelf there. Superior intellect, right? I just read that one. Cody says, do you ever think murder should be legalized? Still no. I think that's the third time we've had to answer the question, should murder be legalized? I am still against the legalization of murder, in case anybody's wondering. Jose Antonio says, usury is canceled, Logos is rising. Correct, absolutely. It is true. The usury-based economy is on its way out. If you're trying to make a dime, moving money, these financial transactions, unless it's Link, okay, unless it's crypto, you're on the way out, Buster. We're turning over your tables. We're going into the money changers in the temple. We're flipping stuff over. We're throwing bags of coins on the ground. All the coin grabbers are they're on the ground trying to pick up their little coins. I think that is the future. Usury canceled, overturned. Logos ascendant, rising. Logos is rising into the air. It is going off. It is going all the way up. And, we like to see that. Patty McGill says, she's asking the question about, she says, Doctor, do cities have unique benefits or are they simply garrisons of the oligarchs who use cities to control? A question for Dr. Jones we didn't get to. I think we'll skip over the ones that are questions for Dr. Jones. Because he's not here to answer them, obviously. Gulielmus says, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but he says, Dr. Jones, please read Cum Ex Apostolatus Officio by Pope Paul IV. I'm butchering, I don't speak Latin. Catholics are to reject heretics if they are elected Pope, i.e. anti-Pope Francis. So it sounds like a sede vacantist, or possibly an Orthodox argument there. Zachary Francis with a big super chat. Thank you so much for the generous super chat. God bless. Much appreciated. Zachary writes, this Nicker just finished Army basic training now to catch up on my tithe. Glad to see the show hasn't been shut down yet. Keep going strong, Nick. Well, thank you so much. God bless you. And hey, thank you for your service, U.S. Army soldier. Thank you for putting your life on the line for our freedom to go out and buy shampoo and things like that. No, that's a little tongue-in-cheek, but we can't do it. But we can't disrespect the troops. Thank you for your service. God bless. Glad to hear basic training has been a success. And you could go out there. You can deploy with U.S. Army Ranger Lockhide and all that. But hey, thank you for the big super chat. Patty McGill says subscribe to Culture Wars. Or actually, we read that when Jones was on. Gulielmus says Dr. Jones and Mr. Wemhoff claim that the AGC and the CIA infiltrated Vatican II and influenced the documents. Yet he defends Vatican II as the work of the Holy Spirit. Make him defend himself. I think this was more of a getting to know you interview. I think this is more of let's flesh out these views. Perhaps the next time, if there is a next time that he comes on the show, we can go Civil War. Think of it Marvel Cinematic Universe style. This was his introductory film. This is his origin story. This is Captain America, the First Avenger. Okay. Captain America Civil War, maybe that's episode 2 with E. Michael Jones. And then we will bring on the Jay Dyer banter. We'll bring on, these hard-hitting questions about Vatican II and everything. But I feel like it would be inappropriate if we were just going to bring him on and, it's going to be taking shots the whole time. Big Ray says, Jeremiah 50:13, you who live by mighty waters, rich in treasures, your end has come. The thread of your life is cut. Upon all mingled people they shall become as women. Babylon, USA. Why America? Prophetic. Very true. Very relatable. Relatable gamer moment. ASDF asks about Paul Tillich. I'm not sure who that is. Sam Day says, we have had 8 years of a black presidency, but only 2.5 years of a Catholic one. Really makes you think. Well, George Washington was Catholic. So I would say that, if we want to get technical, if we want to truly get technical, technically we had 10 and a half years of a Catholic presidency, 8 from George Washington, 2.5 from Jack Kennedy. I understand if not everybody's willing to accept the thesis that Washington was Catholic. I tend to subscribe to that. But, it's still true, still worth asking the question. 8 years of Barack Obama, and how many years of how many other profligates or degenerates or whatever, and only so many years of Catholics, or only 2.5 years of official Catholics, declared Catholics. It really does make you think. ABC says Trump is an Irish puppet. It's true. It's true. If you look at, just as you can see some patterns, you start to notice who's behind things in the media maybe, or in the banks. At the same time, you notice there's another nefarious group of people, Mad Dog Mattis and Donald Trump, and you see there is perhaps some kind of Irish connection happening at the top. The Celt, the eternal Celt. I don't know. I think it's a question worth asking. That's all I'm saying. I'm not anti-Irish. I'm not an anti-Keltite, okay? But look, I'm just noticing some patterns, okay? I'm Irish myself. I'm a 5th-generation Irish potato famine survivor, okay? How can I be an anti-Keltite? I'm not. But I think we have to take a look. It's hard to ignore. It's not a hate fact to point these things out, that there seems to be, some kind of an Irish connection there. Let's see. BN Broughton says, love you and your guest, Nicker. I am an Arian Christian. Neither Paul nor Jesus claim Jesus was divine. He is Christ. Why pagan polytheism? Mark 12:29. I believe Arianism is a heresy. So I'm going to have to say heresy disavowed. You like me, I like you too. But I'm pretty sure Arianism is a heresy. And pagan polytheism, if you're trying to say that the Trinity is polytheism, I just think that's wrong. It's 3 in 1. It's a tripartite God. It's all technically the same. This is very technical stuff. I don't really have the vocabulary to go into it into detail at the moment here. Samurai Spirit says anti-white agenda is stronger than the anti-Christian one. POC don't care if we're Catholic. EMJ wants us to not identify as white. How does that work? Well, I think what E. Michael Jones says, if I could paraphrase a little bit, I don't want to butcher or put words in his mouth, but I think what he's saying is that whether you believe people are going after whites or Europeans, I think you have to recognize that in spite of that, the white identity is an artificial construction. I think you'll find that it really does only apply in terms of it would make sense if white people joined up and organized with each other on the basis of race because they are under assault as a race. I think you could say that. I think the animus is against white people, certainly. But I think if you look at it outside of that level of analysis, does white identity exist authentically in America? I think that's where E. Michael Jones says we have to be skeptical of that. That, can we have some kind of pan-white, pan-European identity? What is the content, what is the substance of a pan-European identity? So I think we're just looking at that with a little bit of depth, and explaining that there are, and even this is explained in Sam Huntington's Who Are We? I recommended that book, I think, last night. Sam Huntington is a liberal. People have challenged me on this. They say, what? Sam Huntington is not a liberal. He identified as a liberal, okay? And he is, by the technical definition. But Sam Huntington, in his book, he says, and he's totally right on this, that identity has different levels of salience, and it's highly context-dependent. That you can have ethnic identity, racial identity, religious identity, tribal identity, and they vary in levels of salience in time and place. And so I don't know if I necessarily subscribe entirely to the idea that it is simply race, it is simply this ethnic religious category, but I do think it is important to look at these things. I think it is important to look at the demographic situation with these different levels of analyses. Does that make sense? So to accept dogmatically, it is only one way, it is only this division, I think belies the complexity of the subject. And that's not a cop-out. It's simply to say that to merely identify, it's just about race, it's just about religion, it's just about one or the other. I think it is a little bit more complicated. So it might be overly reductive to say that it's purely about religion, because I think you could look at Protestants. Blacks happen to be Protestants, I think you'd find more commonality between a white Catholic and a white Protestant than a white Catholic and a black Protestant, or a white Protestant and a black Protestant. But by the same token, it would be reductive to say that it's only racial, because I think there is, a lot in the way of religion and culture and even ideology as well. So I hope that answers your question. Maybe that was directed towards E. Michael Jones, but that's sort of my thinking. For anybody to say it is dogmatically one way, it is reducible to this one category in every circumstance, I think that's oversimplifying a complicated subject. I think there's a lot of frames we can look at it as. So I hope that satisfies the masses. Brown Israelite says, can Quebec ever recover from the Quiet Revolution? Thank you, Nick and EMJ. Great show. Well, thanks. I don't know what the Quiet Revolution is. I'm not Canadian. I'm not too familiar with their history. So maybe that's directed for Dr. Jones. Boopers says, bro, Asuka or Ray? Holy moly, is that E. Michael Jones? Well, I tend to be a third positionist when it comes to NGE. I have typically answered Kaworu. Well, a lot of times people say Ray or Asuka. I think you're kind of a sick person if you answer either. And the popular third option is Misato. Neither Misato. I think if you're taking any of these women into your life, something is deeply, profoundly wrong with you. Clearly, the only relationship in NGE that was, I think, viable for Shinji, or maybe ideal, was a relationship with Kaworu. Now, people say, oh, Nick, does that mean that it's homoerotic? Does that mean it's... Don't read into it more than there is, all right? If you skip, the NGE build series of movies, and you just focus on the series, there's nothing to be ashamed about that goes on in that series, all right? It's all platonic. It's all fine. So, Rei, Asuka, you know what? Asuka's, you're probably a cuck if you're into that. And Rei is like a mutant or a clone, or I couldn't even really follow it. I guess I'm not smart enough. And Misato is older, and, she's got all the classic problems of an e-girl or a thought or whatever. So the obvious answer is Kaworu. Only fragile and weak men would be afraid to say Kaworu is the most viable relationship, is maybe the most generative relationship, I should say, with Shinji. So anyway, and yeah, that was Dr. Jones. Chad Cass says, I heard America first. Please make this new intro loop. Yeah, that might be a good one. That might be a good edit to make. ASDF says, Dr. EMJ, what's your take on Mendelssohn? Was he a Protestant or a Jew? Any other thoughts on composers and their religious influences? Wish we got a chance to answer this one, but I think we were a little bit too late. Didn't see that one in time. It would have been interesting. Soaps' thoughts on the decline of Temple University. Connor says, dude, 2.2K views and rising. Nicholas Rising, I love the show, and you are doing God's work. God bless. By the way, finally got the AF mug. It is awesome. Well, thanks, man. Yeah, great viewership on this one. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. And, hey, thanks for purchasing the mug. Remember, you can purchase the mug gearbubble.com/NJFmug. The link is on my website, nicholasjfuentes.com, or you can go directly gearbubble.com/NJFmug. $15. It's a steal, okay? And it's a great little mug, so I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're getting a lot of usage out of that. Neon says, what about people who don't follow their ancestors' religion? I think the argument goes that it's a cultural expression maybe of Catholicism or Protestantism. Let's see. We're going to try and skip the ones we didn't get to. Bridge Burner says, thank you both for everything you do, and God bless both of you. Keep up the amazing work. Logos is rising. Thanks. I agree. It is on the rise. Let's take a look. Got to scroll up a little bit here. Antonio says, gay phobia, racism, sexism, anti-Semitism does not exist. I agree. I would say that, if we're going to be precise about our terms, does prejudice exist? Does discrimination exist? Things of that nature, of course. But the words racism, sexism, homophobia, these are words designed to control. This is all a linguistic attempt to control political and social attitudes. So I would add a little caveat. What many people think racism and all the rest describe, I think all those things are real and true. Prejudice, discrimination. And that's not to say that they're always bad. That's not to say they carry negative connotations. I don't even mean it in that way. I mean, does prejudice exist? Does discrimination does discrimination exist? Does hatred exist, or gross generalizations or whatever? Certainly. But you have to be precise about the terms. Racism seems to be a catch-all for anything that is pro-white or pro-Christian. And I think we know that. We've established that on the show before. So a lot of liberals might say, what? Racism doesn't exist? Well, what about, slavery? What about when a black person gets called the N-word? Well, okay. There are cases where you could be insensitive or prejudiced or discriminatory or hateful against a person based on whatever. But that's not really what any of these terms mean. I come on the show and I crack a couple of jokes and I say, America would be better off if it was more racially cohesive, and I get called a racist. Well, then it's about political control. So that's a good super chat. Patricia says, is the SSPX schismatic? I believe Society of St. Pius X, I believe is not schismatic. I believe they are in communion with Rome. Booper says, conservatives in America bash the EU as an all-encompassing entity that tries to control a diverse population. I see our federal system as very similar. We should create boundaries within our country. It's a little bit different, I would say, only because America as a nation, I think, was coherent as a nation state at some point. I think you could say that obviously it has degenerated over time, but you could see very clearly that after the Civil War, and maybe until the time of World War II or perhaps the mid-1960s, there was a sense of cohesive national identity. And so you have a nation state in France, a nation state in Germany, a nation state in the United Kingdom, which means there is some, there's some relationship between the nation, which is, of course, the people, and the state. And the state is an expression or representation of the nation, which, of course, this is the diplomatic revolution, the creation of the modern world, we would say, in a very technical way, with the Treaty of Westphalia in the 16th century, early 16th century, I believe, which created the nation state, established national sovereignty. And so when we say that the European Union is the supranational entity, we're saying these nation states are being controlled by this bureaucratic, sort of sick, globalist organization. I think that has definitely what has become of America, but I don't think it was necessarily always that way, so I don't think it's a perfect parallel, but definitely I think, to say that there's no similarities between Brussels and Washington, D.C., that's obviously not true. It's obviously, there are similarities. But is a perfect parallel? I would disagree a little bit. Bofa says, Pagan and Wignat hoes mad. Excellent show. Thanks. Glad you enjoy. Custard says, hey, Nick, great show. What do you think about Faith Goldie? Okay, I'm not going to read that. We're not going to disparage a friend. But thanks. Glad you like the show. Max Carson's the 17-year-old boomer here. How do I get America First Premium with a Visa gift card? It seems to only want a credit or debit card. Help. Relatable teen moment. Hello, relatable teen moment department. I remember when I was in high school and I had to rely on Visa gift cards before I bought into the Jewish usury system and got a debit and a credit card. Well, that's, gotta establish credit. I don't know. The way you buy the premium membership is through PayPal. So I don't know if you can put funds into PayPal through a Visa gift card or not. I'm not sure. I think what you may be able to do is, I think you can transfer funds to PayPal through local locations. Like, I think you go to 7-Eleven. Correct me if I'm wrong, and put money on your PayPal. There's designated places. Maybe I'm thinking of something else like Amazon or, there's something that does that. So I don't know. I'm not positive. Just Google it. Why are you asking me how to put Visa gift card funds on a PayPal? Because it's through PayPal. So I would check that out. I'm no expert. Cassie, Queen of Spades Dylan says, ask Gay Dyer why he's ducking Southern Israelite. Well, that's not polite. I respect Jay Dyer. I'm not saying that. But I don't know. Why is everyone asking me? Ask Jay Dyer this. Ask E. Michael Jones that. I'm in the middle of this. I like them both, okay? ASDF says, did you block EMJ on Twitter? Look at his tweet. No, I didn't block him on Twitter. Why would I block? We're mutuals on Twitter. Okay. The Bunko Man says, Nick blocked I did not block E. Michael Jones on Twitter. Let me look him up. to just prove to myself. I don't know why. Yeah, it says you follow each other. I did not block him. We are mutuals. People, I don't know, man. Do I carry on? Do I persist on the show? Sam Day says thoughts on the distributist. Don't like him. Never was a fan. Nasty guy. David Spurner says, please talk about the Spencer chat on the premium show. I definitely will do. I will spill the tea. Gully Elma says, Jay Dyer admitted he'd duck a debate with Diamond Brothers of Most Holy Family Monastery. Okay, good. I don't know who that is, but good to know. Eric, if anybody's keeping score about the debate lineup here, Eric says you get $5 for the Lock High joke. Well, thanks. I'm glad somebody appreciated that. Ryan says, Nick, I think you accidentally blocked EMJ. I'm literally a Twitter e-celebrity. I'm verified. I have 40,000 followers. Nick, I think you might have accidentally blocked. Like, what, you would know? Like, you would know, like, I would make that mistake. All these people all the time. I just can't do it. I can't do it. Okay, with the unwashed masses, with the NPCs. You know, people not comprehending my 5-dimensional chess. You know, stop and think. Do I know better than Nick on the issue of Twitter? Or do I know better? Does a quick Twitter search resolve this? You know, can I figure this out? If you go, it's on there. You know, if it's on my following, it's on E. Michael Jones's following. You can see very plainly. There are a variety of reasons why it might say it doesn't show the retweet. It only shows the link. It could be if it's like sensitive content, or if there's a variety of reasons this happens. If the tweet is deleted, I assume that's what it might be. So no, I did not. I'm looking at it right now. It says E. Michael Jones follows you. I follow E. Michael Jones. So I don't think so. Let's see. Nick Fuentes is bad optics. Yikes. Says, why did you block EMJ on Twitter? I just can't. You just can't get a break. Literal Human Garbage says, relatable. That one's a little bit more honest. Says, kidding, joking. He says, little brain democracy is based because the people should have a voice. Big brain democracy is gay because the people should not have a voice. Galaxy brain democracy is based because the people shouldn't have a voice. I like what you did there. I see what you did there. That's funny. That's a thinker. That is a good joke. You, sir, win the internet for the day. Have some Reddit gold. I like that one. Colgate says, my whole gang sell poo-poo and crack rock for the shekels. Street Knickers got your back if you need help building American Burger. Thank you. Good to know. Gen Z Philosophy says, almost 2,000 watching, man. Congrats, big guy. God bless. Hey, thank you, man. I appreciate it. Samurai Spirit says, very good answer to my question. Thanks. Great show. Thanks. Glad you like the answer. Sam Day says, does your middle initial stand for Jew? Yeah. Yeah, Nicholas Jew Fuentes. You got it. Correct. Yeah, Nicholas Jewish Fuentes, I think is, that is on the birth certificate. That is what they call me. Somehow that wasn't enough to get into the Ben Shapiro Club. You know, I said, hey, Ben Shapiro, I don't mean to be that guy. I don't mean to pull out this card, but, you know, my middle name is Jewish. I'm one of you. He wouldn't have it. He said, no, you've gone too far. You're too much of an epic gamer, Zoomer. And we have to get rid of you. Now you've got to die. And I'm like, oh, all right. You know, my parents tried. They paid their dues. They thought that might save me one day, but it wasn't enough, right? Didn't have a Jewish mother. It didn't work, right? Dio Strabo says, how much money do I give you? How about $1,000? ASDF says, I guess the block screenshot from EMJ was a joke. Yeah, you think? Maybe. People are so, you just can't deal with people anymore. You can't have a sense of humor. For example, I do America First 394 times. I don't think I've ever been called a content creator, a showrunner. I do the show 394 times. I don't get called the content creator. I don't get called a showrunner, whatever. I've named them 394 times. I've talked about the Israel lobby 394 times. I don't get called based and red pilled. I get called cringe and blue pilled. I like a picture by trans cat girl with the thigh highs one time, and now I'm a trap thirster. Now, all of a sudden, everybody's got something to say, and it was as a joke. So you just can't have fun anymore. You just can't joke around with people. You know, Irony Shop is closing up. People just don't understand. You try to be ironic. You try to joke with people. You think, just when you thought, I've cultivated a niche cult following of high IQ, post-ironic Zoomers, and then you like the wrong picture, and all of a sudden, your life is over. You're canceled. all of a sudden there's all kind of rumors being spread about you. They're talking about the Discord channel. Your career is in flames. Your reputation is in tatters. So, the end of comedy. PC gone mad. Absolutely mad. PC gone mad. Political correctness is killing comedy, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Classical Thea says, LOL, EMJ was doing the Patrick Casey block joke. Okay, see, so people must have assumed that EMJ is a boomer and he might not be able to joke about this kind of stuff, but clearly a joke. At my expense, Patrick Casey had to go out and say, this is a joke, everybody. I would never block my brother, Patrick Casey, okay? My pagan Aryan brother. Typically when a pagan posts that picture, and it's very cringe, but a pagan will post this picture, I'll totally eliminate the pagan, persecute them wherever they hide, and somebody will post this picture begging for a surrender, for a peace. And the picture is a cartoon, and it's Clown World closing in on two Chad Aryan heroes, and one is the pagan and one is a Christian. And the Christian says, together, and the pagan says, together. Now, normally I say cringe, Pagan Oaks, gay department, but me and Patrick Casey, I could see that happening. Patrick Casey, the humble Keltoid, myself, the humble taco merchant, the humble Mexican immigrant. I could see us in that picture, Castizo future, Irish future, Catholic pagan, back to back, America first, together. American Identity Movement, together. And then Jared Taylor, perhaps in the background. And he says, yeah, I'm thinking I'm back, and it's American Renaissance, the Trinity, right? So no, I don't block Patrick Casey. I don't block E. Michael Jones. I only block cringe nats, all right? Anyway, LC17 says, look at E. Michael Jones' Twitter and you'll see. Oh, he says, why can't I see NickJFuentes' Twitter anymore? I was just talking to him on the computer, and it's Nick Fuentes blocked. E. Michael Jones, practical joke at my expense. Okay, all right, Baby boomer basically saying to me, I'm still hip, try this one on for size, youngster. You played me, perhaps an old boomer can learn new tricks. Very, very impressive. Well played, Dr. Jones, well played. Name Jeff says, just got home from wage cucking, press F, big F. Yeah, E. Michael Jones hitting the wages very hard. He said, if you're going to get a job, you got to get the wages directly. He basically, look, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but he said, if you're a wagey, you're a wage slave. And he said, if you're a wage slave watching the show, go back in the wage cage. You're not a free person. You're not a free man. That's what I heard. That's, that's what I heard. Maybe you could go back, rewind it, but that's what I heard. So, yeah, big F for all our wages out there. Cannot be carpenters, and we all know who is the first carpenter. At least I believe that's how the story goes. Who is the world's first carpenter? We all know his name, so based, red-pilled, carpentry versus cringe and blue-pilled. What are you going to do? Sell insurance? What are you going to do? Work at a bank? I'm going to be a bank teller. That's a great job. I'm going to be a bank teller. I'm going to be a pharmacist. I will work in marketing. I don't know. The big man upstairs, when he came down, he became a man. Did he become a bank teller? Did he become, did he work in the financial sector? Did he work in the Loop? Did he work in Midtown, Manhattan? I don't think so. First, I believe that's how the story goes. The world's first carpenter. We all know. Let's see. ASDF says, Nick, you're negging us out here, but we like it. But they like it. That's what I tell people. People tell me all the time, Nick, you're too hard on so-and-so. But they like it. They love it. Particularly with the women. Nick, you give women a too hard of a time, you're negging them. Yeah, but they like it. That's the real red pill. Abuse. The wages, the masses, the woman, they crave the strong hand. No, I'm kidding. I'm only kidding. I'm only joking. I mean that in a purely joking, ironic, rhetorical sense. But we all know. Do women prefer the nice, the kind, the gentle, or do they prefer the strong hand? Do they prefer the strong, domineering hand, the neg, the hand, the righteous hand? I don't know. Why don't you ask them? Why don't you go up and say, excuse me, ma'am. This guy Nick told me on Twitter that, you guys like being They're done. They're already, ew, get away from me. Get away from me. Get away from me, cuck. Get away from me, beta. You know, and then they go with Chad. They go with the N-word cucks like, no, I'm kidding. That's what Kyle Kashuv says, but that's what happens, right? Or the jocks, you know? So they prefer the strong hand of the Catholic Church, of a Catholic man, of a righteous man who will put them on a righteous path. Jokes, but we're all kidding, but we are all joking. It's all jokes. We're all having just a good time here. But it looks like that's our last super chat. That's going to do it. Wow, you know, I think this is going to be our last show. Yeah, so this is our last show. You know, I think there's been, about 50 violations of the terms of service tonight. So I think this will be signing off if we're still around next week. No, but that's going to do it for us. Those are all our super chats. I hope you enjoyed the interview. Wow. Hey, and thanks one last final time to E. Michael Jones for taking the time. We love the interview, and it's good for him to come on and tell us, give us a little life advice, give us some wisdom. So thanks to him. Thanks to everybody who watched. Thanks to everybody who agitated. No, you know what? You should be thanking me. You agitated me, okay, or irritated me by sending money to me, okay? These super chats getting under my skin, sending $5, $10, telling me how to, create content that they'd like to see. What an annoyance, what a nuisance. You should be thanking me. Hey, thanks, Nick, for putting together a great show. I just can't stop. I just keep riffing. I'm like Don Rickles. I'm out of control. No, but thanks everybody for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to check us out, NicholasJFuentes.com/membership to become a premium subscriber. $5 a month. That is so cheap. If you're a carpenter, you can afford this. If you're a carpenter, what are you kidding me? If you're a carpenter, you're doing okay. So carpenters got to sign up. People that work with their hands, wages, maybe you can put it off. But it's only $5 a month. You get one additional show every week. I used to say it's the Sunday show. Now it's like, the approximately Sunday premium episode exclusively for the premium members. We did one last week. It was 2 hours, and we covered a lot of subjects on that one. We covered Faraday speech. We covered human events. We covered James Charles. 2-hour show. There's 20 plus hours of content already there. Just by signing up, you get access to well over 20 hours. You get access to my interview with Jesse Lee Peterson. So be sure to check that out. The link is down below. It's also the best way to support our show. 100% viewer funded. That's why we can get people like E. Michael Jones, because we don't get usurer money or, Zionist funds. So be sure to check that out. Link is down below, as I said. Be sure to subscribe to our channel. Give us a big thumbs up. Leave a comment down below. Click the notification bell to get notified every time I go live. Remember, we are on the air Monday through Friday, 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm Nicholas J. Fuentes. This is America First. As always, thank you for watching. Thanks to our super chatters. Thanks to our premium members. Thanks to everybody who watches and supports the show. We will see you on Monday. Until then, have a great weekend and have a great rest of your Friday evening.
Americanism, not globalism, will be our credo. It's going to be only America first. America first.